There is a growing sense in the world today that something is not right. You can feel it in the news, in the unrest, in the confusion, and even in the silence of people who once had certainty. Deep inside, there is a question that many are afraid to ask. What if the time is closer than we think? What if the moment that has been spoken of for generations is not some distant event, but something that is approaching rapidly, quietly, and without warning? The truth is, the idea of the rapture has often been treated as a distant theory, something to debate, something to argue about, something to push aside for later. But what if later is no longer guaranteed? What if the signs are already here, not just in the world, but in our own lives? Because the greatest danger is not that the world is unprepared. The greatest danger is that people who believe they are ready may actually not be. One of the most serious warning signs is spiritual complacency. There are many who once burned with passion, who once had urgency in their faith. But over time, that fire has grown cold. Life became busy, distractions increased, and slowly, almost unnoticed, their focus shifted. They still attend, they still speak the right words, they still carry the identity, but the hunger is gone. The expectation is gone. The sense that this could happen at any moment has faded, and when expectation fades, preparation fades with it. A heart that is no longer watching is a heart that is slowly drifting. Another warning sign is when truth becomes negotiable. We are living in a time where people are reshaping truth to fit comfort. What was once clear is now questioned. What was once firm is now flexible. People begin to choose what they want to believe and ignore what challenges them. But truth is not something that can be adjusted to suit personal desires. When truth is compromised, direction is lost. And when direction is lost, it becomes easy to walk a path that feels right but leads to the wrong destination. This is dangerous because it creates a false sense of security. A person may believe they are standing firm, when in reality they have already moved away from the foundation. There is also the warning sign of being more connected to the world than to what truly matters. Look around and you will see how easily people become consumed with temporary things. Success, recognition, possessions, and approval have taken center stage. None of these things are wrong on their own, but when they become the priority, they begin to replace what should come first. The heart can only hold one true priority. And when the focus shifts completely to the temporary, the eternal is pushed aside. This is not always obvious because it happens gradually. It does not announce itself. It simply replaces one desire with another until the original purpose is no longer visible. Another sign is ignoring the urgency of the times. There are clear indicators all around us that things are accelerating. Events are unfolding at a pace that was once unimaginable, yet many people choose to ignore it. They dismiss it as coincidence, exaggeration, or fear. They continue as if everything will remain the same. But history has shown again and again that sudden moments change everything. The problem is not that people are unaware. The problem is that they are unwilling to respond. Awareness without action leads to missed opportunities. And when it comes to something as significant as this, missing it is not a small matter. Then there is the warning sign of relying on association rather than personal conviction. Many people assume they are ready simply because of where they belong or who they are connected to. They believe that being part of a community, a tradition, or a group is enough. But readiness is not transferred through association. It is personal. It is individual. It is something that cannot be borrowed or inherited. Each person must stand on their own. Each person must examine their own heart. Because when the moment comes, it will not be about where you stood publicly, but where you truly stood internally. There are also those who delay. They tell themselves that there is still time, that they will take things seriously later, that they will make changes when it becomes more convenient. But delay is one of the most dangerous illusions. Time is not something we control. Moments pass. Opportunities close, and what was once possible may not remain available. The idea of later has caused more people to miss critical moments than almost anything else, because later often becomes never. Another subtle but powerful warning sign is the loss of sensitivity. When a person becomes desensitized, they no longer respond the way they once did. What once convicted them no longer affects them. What once stirred them no longer moves them. This is not something that happens overnight. It is the result of repeated neglect, repeated compromise, and repeated dismissal. Over time, the heart becomes resistant. And when the heart becomes resistant, it becomes difficult to recognize what is right in front of you. Fear can also play a role. Some people avoid thinking about these things because it makes them uncomfortable. They would rather focus on what feels safe and predictable. But ignoring something does not make it disappear. In fact, it often makes the impact greater when it finally arrives. Facing reality may not always be comfortable, but it is necessary. Because preparation begins with recognition. There is also the danger of distraction. We are living in one of the most distracted generations in history. There is always something demanding attention, always something pulling focus away. And while these distractions may seem harmless, they have a cumulative effect. They consume time, they consume energy, and they reduce awareness. A distracted mind is not a prepared mind. It misses signals. It overlooks signs. It delays action. Another important warning sign is the absence of genuine transformation. It is possible to appear changed without actually being changed. It is possible to adopt behaviors without experiencing true transformation, but real readiness comes from within. It is not about appearance, it is about reality. And when there is no real change, there is no real preparation. This creates a dangerous gap between perception and truth. There are also those who become comfortable in routine. They go through the motions without questioning, without examining, without seeking deeper understanding. Routine can create stability, but it can also create stagnation. When something becomes routine, it can lose its meaning. And when meaning is lost, purpose is weakened. This leads to a state where everything appears normal on the outside, but something essential is missing on the inside. One of the most overlooked warning signs is pride. Pride convinces a person that they are already where they need to be. It removes the desire to grow. It blocks correction. It resists truth. A person who believes they cannot be wrong will never see the need to change, and without change, there is no progress. Pride creates a barrier that prevents awareness, and without awareness, preparation becomes impossible. There is also the issue of misplaced confidence. Confidence is important, but it must be placed in the right foundation. When confidence is based on assumptions rather than truth, it becomes dangerous. It gives a false sense of security. It convinces a person that everything is fine when it may not be. This is why examination is so important, not to create fear, but to ensure alignment with what is real. As you consider these warning signs, it is important to understand that this is not about fear. It is about awareness. It is about clarity. It is about making sure that what you believe matches reality, because the cost of being unprepared is too great. The question is not whether this moment will come. The question is whether you will be ready when it does. And readiness is not something that happens by accident. It is intentional. It requires attention. It requires honesty. It requires a willingness to examine, to adjust, and to respond. This is a moment to pause and reflect, not on what others are doing, but on your own position. Not on appearances, but on reality. Because at the end of the day, what matters most is not what it looks like from the outside, but what is true on the inside. If there is complacency, it can be replaced with urgency. If there is compromise, it can be replaced with truth. If there is distraction, it can be replaced with focus. If there is delay, it can be replaced with action. Every warning sign is also an opportunity to recognize, to respond, and to realign. The time to consider these things is not later, it is now. Because now is the only moment that is guaranteed. Now is the moment where change is possible. Now is the moment where preparation can begin or be renewed. There is a difference between thinking you are ready and actually being ready. That difference is what this message is about. Not to create doubt, but to create certainty. Not to cause fear, but to bring clarity. Because when clarity comes, decisions become easier, direction becomes clearer, and preparation becomes intentional. Do not assume, do not delay, do not ignore. Take this moment seriously. Examine honestly. Respond intentionally. Because when the moment comes, it will not wait. And those who are ready will not be the ones who assumed they were ready, but the ones who made sure they were. Let this not be something you hear and forget. Let it be something you consider and act upon. Because readiness is not about knowledge alone. It is about response. And your response determines your position. The world may continue as it always has, at least on the surface. But beneath that surface, things are shifting. And those who are aware will not be caught off guard. They will be prepared. They will be ready. They will not miss what others overlook. This is your moment to decide which side you will be on. Not based on assumption, but based on truth. Not based on comfort, but based on reality. Because in the end, what matters is not what you intended to do, but what you actually did. Make the choice to be ready, not later, not someday, but now. And even beyond all of this, there is another layer that many fail to recognize, and that is the danger of familiarity. When something becomes too familiar, it can lose its impact. Words that once carried weight begin to sound ordinary. Messages that once stirred the heart begin to feel routine. And when that happens, a person can sit in the middle of truth and still remain unchanged. Familiarity can create the illusion that because something is known, it has already been applied. But knowing is not the same as living. Hearing is not the same as responding. There are people who have heard about these things for years. They can explain it, teach it, even debate it. But somewhere along the way, it stopped being personal. It became information instead of transformation. And information alone does not prepare anyone. It can inform the mind, but it does not automatically align the heart. This is why there are those who appear strong outwardly, yet inwardly they are distant. They have the language, but not the urgency. They have the knowledge, but not the readiness. Another warning sign is when priorities are constantly postponed. People often tell themselves that they will realign their lives when things slow down, when circumstances improve, or when they feel more ready. But life rarely slows down on its own. There will always be responsibilities, pressures, and distractions. Waiting for the perfect moment is one of the most effective ways to remain unprepared. Because the perfect moment never arrives. What matters is what is done in the present moment, even when it is not ideal. There is also a growing tendency to measure readiness by comparison. People look at others and assume that as long as they are doing better than someone else, they are in a safe position. But readiness is not relative. It is not determined by how one person compares to another. It is determined by alignment with truth. Comparison creates a false standard. It lowers the urgency. It shifts the focus from personal responsibility to external observation. And in doing so, it distracts from what truly matters. Some people are waiting for a dramatic sign in their own life before they take things seriously. They expect a moment that will force them to change, something undeniable, something overwhelming. But often the warnings are not dramatic, they are subtle. They come through conviction, through quiet realization, through moments of clarity that can easily be ignored. The danger is not that the signs are absent. The danger is that they are dismissed because they do not match expectations. There is also the issue of inconsistency. A person may feel motivated one moment and completely disengaged the next. They may respond strongly during certain times, only to drift away shortly after. This pattern creates instability. It prevents lasting change. It creates cycles of temporary commitment without real progress. And over time, it becomes easier to accept this cycle as normal. But inconsistency weakens readiness. It creates gaps that can grow wider if they are not addressed. Another subtle sign is when external image becomes more important than internal reality. People may focus on how they are perceived rather than what is actually true. They maintain appearances, they protect their image, but they avoid dealing with deeper issues. This creates a disconnect between what is seen and what is real. And while others may not notice, that disconnect still exists. Readiness cannot be built on appearances. It must be rooted in truth, even when that truth is uncomfortable. There are also those who resist accountability. They avoid correction, they distance themselves from voices that challenge them, and they surround themselves only with what affirms them. While encouragement is important, so is correction. Growth requires both. Without accountability, blind spots remain unaddressed. Patterns remain unchanged, and over time those blind spots can become significant obstacles. Another warning sign is when distractions are not just present but embraced. Instead of recognizing them as obstacles, they become part of daily life. People justify them, defend them, and even depend on them. But distractions do not simply take up time. They reshape focus, they redirect energy, and when focus is constantly divided, it becomes difficult to maintain clarity. A person who is constantly distracted may not even realize how far their attention has drifted. There is also the danger of emotional dependence. Some rely on feelings to determine their response. When they feel motivated, they act. When they do not, they pause. But readiness cannot depend on emotions. Emotions are temporary. They change with circumstances. True readiness requires consistency beyond feelings. It requires commitment that remains even when motivation fades. Another overlooked sign is when small compromises are ignored. People often believe that only major decisions matter, but small choices, repeated over time, shape direction. A small compromise may seem insignificant in the moment, but it creates a pattern, and patterns lead to outcomes. What is tolerated today can become normalized tomorrow, and what becomes normal can eventually define a person's path. There are also those who become overly focused on understanding everything before taking action. They want complete clarity, complete certainty, complete explanation, but waiting for total understanding can delay necessary response. There are moments when action must come before full comprehension, because readiness is not about having every answer. It is about responding to what is already clear. Another sign is the loss of urgency in daily living. Days begin to blend together. Time passes without reflection. There is no sense of intentionality, no awareness of how moments are being used. Life becomes automatic. And when life becomes automatic, it becomes easy to overlook what truly matters. Intentional living is a key part of readiness. Without it, even important things can be neglected. There is also a tendency to avoid self-examination. It is easier to stay busy, to stay distracted, to stay focused on external matters than to look inward. But without examination, issues remain hidden. Without reflection, growth is limited. A person who never pauses to evaluate their own life may continue in the same direction without realizing where it leads. Another warning sign is when conviction is replaced by convenience. Decisions are made based on what is easiest rather than what is right. Comfort becomes the priority. And while comfort is not wrong, it cannot be the guiding principle. Because what is comfortable is not always what is necessary. And what is necessary is not always comfortable. There are also those who rely heavily on past experiences. They look back at moments where they were strong, where they were committed, where they responded well, and they assume that those moments define their current state. But past experiences do not guarantee present readiness. Each moment requires its own response. Each day requires its own attention. Another subtle sign is when awareness does not lead to change. A person may recognize issues, acknowledge them, even speak about them, but take no action. Awareness without action creates a gap, and that gap can become a place where progress stops. Recognition is important, but it must be followed by response. There is also the influence of environment. The people, conversations, and influences that surround a person shape their thinking. If the environment lacks urgency, it becomes easier to adopt the same mindset. If the environment minimizes importance, it becomes easier to do the same. This is why environment matters. It either strengthens awareness or weakens it. Another warning sign is when time is undervalued. People assume they have more of it than they actually do. They delay important decisions, postpone necessary changes, and treat time as something that will always be available. But time is one of the most limited resources. Once it passes, it cannot be recovered, and how it is used determines outcomes. There are also those who become discouraged and stop trying. They feel that they have failed too many times, that they have missed too many opportunities, that it is too late to change. But discouragement can become a barrier if it is allowed to remain. It can prevent action, it can block progress, and it can create a false conclusion that nothing can be done. Another sign is when focus is divided between too many directions. A person may attempt to pursue multiple priorities without clear alignment. This creates confusion. It reduces effectiveness, and it makes it difficult to fully commit to what truly matters. Clarity of focus is essential for readiness. There is also the danger of becoming overly comfortable with delay. When delay becomes a habit, it no longer feels like a problem, it feels normal. And what feels normal is rarely questioned. But delay, repeated over time, leads to missed opportunities. It creates a pattern of inaction that becomes harder to break. And then there is the quiet but powerful warning sign of indifference. Not active resistance, not open rejection, but simple indifference. A lack of response, a lack of concern, a lack of urgency. Indifference is dangerous because it does not draw attention to itself. It operates quietly, but its impact is significant. Because where there is no response, there is no preparation. And beyond indifference, there is another quiet danger that often goes unnoticed, and that is the gradual acceptance of delay as a lifestyle. It does not feel like rejection. It does not appear as resistance. It simply becomes a pattern where important things are always pushed to another day. A person tells themselves they will respond tomorrow, that they will take it seriously later, that they will make the change when the moment feels right. But moments do not wait for readiness. They come when they come. And those who are constantly postponing eventually find themselves unprepared, not because they rejected the truth, but because they delayed their response to it. There are also those who become too comfortable in partial commitment. They give just enough to feel at ease, just enough to maintain identity, just enough to avoid conviction, but not enough to create real alignment. Partial commitment creates a false balance. It gives the appearance of involvement without the reality of transformation. And over time, it becomes easy to believe that this level is sufficient. But readiness cannot be built on half measures. It requires a complete response, not a divided one. Another subtle warning sign is when people begin to redefine what readiness means in order to fit their current state. Instead of adjusting their lives to match what is required, they adjust the definition to match their lives. This removes the tension. It removes the urgency. It creates comfort where there should be reflection. But redefining standards does not change reality, it only changes perception. And perception without truth can lead a person in the wrong direction while they remain completely confident they are right. There is also the issue of spiritual fatigue. Some have been waiting, watching, hearing, and responding for so long that they begin to grow tired. The initial urgency fades, the expectation weakens, and slowly the mindset shifts from anticipation to routine. Fatigue can cause a person to lower their guard. It can reduce their sensitivity. It can make them less responsive over time. And this is dangerous because it happens gradually. A person does not suddenly stop. They slowly drift into a place where their awareness is no longer as sharp as it once was. Another sign is when discipline is replaced by impulse. Instead of consistent, intentional action, decisions are made based on momentary feelings. When something feels right, it is pursued. When it does not, it is ignored. But readiness requires discipline. It requires consistency that does not depend on emotion, because there will be moments when the right choice is not the easy one, and the necessary step is not the appealing one. There are also those who rely heavily on external motivation. They wait for someone else to remind them, to inspire them, to push them forward. And while encouragement is valuable, dependence on it can create weakness. Because when that external voice is not present, There is no internal drive to continue. True readiness is not sustained by external pressure alone, it is sustained by internal conviction. Another overlooked warning sign is when people become selective in their response. They choose what they want to hear and ignore what challenges them. They embrace what is comfortable and avoid what requires change. This selective approach creates imbalance. It allows growth in certain areas while neglecting others, and over time, those neglected areas can become points of vulnerability. There is also the danger of assuming that awareness equals readiness. A person may be fully aware of what is happening, fully informed about what is coming, and yet still not be prepared. Awareness is important, but it is only the first step. Without action, awareness remains incomplete. It informs, but it does not transform. Another sign is when people become overly attached to routine environments that do not challenge them. They stay in spaces where they are never pushed to grow, never encouraged to examine, never required to change. Comfort becomes the priority, and growth is sacrificed. But without growth, readiness cannot develop. It remains static in a world that is constantly moving. There are also those who underestimate the importance of small, daily decisions. They focus on major moments and overlook the significance of consistent, everyday choices. But readiness is not built in a single moment. It is built over time through repeated decisions. What is done daily shapes what will happen eventually. Ignoring small decisions can lead to large consequences. Another subtle warning sign is when conviction becomes temporary. A person may feel a strong sense of urgency in one moment, make promises, set intentions, and then slowly return to previous patterns. This creates a cycle of response without change, and over time it becomes easier to make promises than to fulfill them. But readiness is not found in intentions. It is found in actions that are sustained. There is also the issue of misplaced priorities within time. People may spend hours on what is temporary and give minimal attention to what is lasting. This imbalance shapes perspective, it influences decisions, and it ultimately determines direction. Time reveals what truly matters, not what is claimed, but what is practiced. Another warning sign is when people become resistant to discomfort. They avoid anything that challenges them, anything that requires effort, anything that creates tension. But growth often comes through discomfort. Change requires effort. And avoiding these things can limit progress. A person who avoids discomfort may also avoid necessary change. There are also those who assume that they will recognize the moment when it comes and respond instantly. They believe that when the time arrives, they will naturally be ready. But readiness is not something that appears suddenly. It is the result of preparation. And without preparation, recognition alone is not enough. Another subtle danger is when people become passive observers instead of active participants. They watch what is happening, they discuss it, they analyze it, but they do not respond to it. Observation without participation creates distance. It keeps a person informed but not involved. And readiness requires involvement. There is also the tendency to rely on consistency in the world rather than recognizing change. People assume that because things have continued in a certain way, they will always continue that way. But history shows that change can come suddenly. And those who rely on stability without preparation can be caught off guard. Another sign is when people become overly focused on external validation. They seek approval, recognition, and affirmation from others. And while these things can be encouraging, they cannot replace personal conviction. A person who depends on external validation may struggle to maintain consistency when it is not present. There are also those who minimize the importance of immediate response. They believe that small delays do not matter, that waiting a little longer will not make a difference, but repeated delays create patterns, and patterns shape outcomes. What is delayed today can become neglected tomorrow. Another warning sign is when people become overly confident in their own understanding without remaining open to growth. They believe they have reached a level where no further examination is needed, but growth is continuous, and a lack of openness can create stagnation. There is also the issue of divided attention between what is essential and what is optional. When optional things receive equal or greater attention than essential ones, priorities become misaligned, and misalignment leads to ineffective preparation. Another subtle danger is when people become accustomed to hearing warnings without responding to them. Over time, repeated exposure without action can reduce sensitivity. What once felt urgent begins to feel normal, and what feels normal is less likely to provoke change. There are also those who allow temporary setbacks to define their direction. Instead of learning and adjusting, they stop moving forward. They allow failure to become a conclusion rather than a lesson. And this can prevent continued preparation. Another sign is when people become overly dependent on structure without developing personal responsibility. They rely on systems, schedules, and environments to maintain consistency, but struggle when those structures are not present. True readiness requires personal responsibility that goes beyond external systems. There is also the danger of underestimating the influence of habits. Habits shape behavior. They create patterns that operate automatically. And if those habits are not aligned, they can work against readiness rather than supporting it. Another warning sign is when people treat important matters as secondary concerns. They focus on what is urgent but temporary while neglecting what is important and lasting. This shift in focus can gradually move them away from what truly matters. There are also those who avoid making clear decisions. They remain in a state of indecision, neither fully committed nor fully disengaged. This creates instability, and instability prevents clear direction. Another subtle sign is when people become overly comfortable with inconsistency. They accept it as normal. They stop striving for alignment, and this acceptance can prevent growth. There is also the issue of failing to recognize progression. Changes often happen gradually, shifts occur over time, and without awareness, a person may not realize how far they have moved from where they once were. Another warning sign is when people focus more on explaining their position than examining it. They defend their choices instead of evaluating them, and this can prevent necessary change. There are also those who become overly focused on future intentions while neglecting present action. They speak about what they will do, what they plan to change, what they intend to pursue, but take no steps in the present moment. Another subtle danger is when people become disconnected from the seriousness of what they claim to believe. Their words reflect importance, but their actions reflect indifference. And this disconnect can create confusion. There is also the tendency to underestimate how quickly circumstances can change. People assume they will have time to adjust when needed. But change can come suddenly, and those who are not prepared may not have the opportunity to respond. Another warning sign is when people become overly reliant on familiarity instead of remaining alert. They assume that because something has been consistent, it will remain that way. But assumptions can create blind spots. There are also those who allow routine to replace intentionality. They go through the same patterns without reflection, without adjustment, without awareness. And this can lead to stagnation. Another subtle sign is when people become more reactive than proactive. They respond only when necessary instead of preparing in advance. And readiness requires preparation before the moment arrives. There is also the issue of neglecting internal alignment while maintaining external activity. A person may remain active, involved, and engaged, but internally they are not aligned, and this gap can grow over time. Another warning sign is when people become overly focused on short-term outcomes while neglecting long-term consequences. They prioritize immediate results without considering lasting impact. There are also those who allow comfort to become the primary guide for decision-making. And while comfort is appealing, it is not always reliable, because what is comfortable is not always what is right. Another subtle danger is when people assume that opportunity will always be available. They believe they can respond at any time, make changes whenever they choose, and adjust when needed. But opportunities can close, moments can pass, and what is available now may not be available later. And in all of this, the pattern becomes clear that readiness is not determined by a single decision, a single moment, or a single action. It is shaped by consistent response, intentional living, and continuous alignment. It is not something that can be assumed, inherited, or delayed without consequence. It is something that must be maintained with awareness, strengthened with discipline, and protected from the subtle patterns that gradually pull attention away. And now, after everything that has been said, after every warning, every sign, every quiet reminder, the question is no longer about information. It is no longer about what you have heard or what you understand. The question is simple, direct, and unavoidable. Are you truly ready, or have you only convinced yourself that you are? Because in the end, this is not about the world. It is not about what others are doing. It is not about comparison, appearance, or assumption. It comes down to a personal reality that no one else can answer for you. A moment will come that will not wait for explanation, that will not pause for preparation, that will not adjust itself to your timing. And when that moment arrives, it will reveal the truth, not the image, not the intention, but the reality. This is why these warnings matter. Not to create fear, but to awaken urgency. Not to push you away, but to call you closer. Because every sign is not just a warning, it is an invitation. An invitation to wake up, to realign, to step out of complacency and into awareness. An opportunity to move from assumption to certainty, from delay to action, from distraction to focus. Do not walk away from this thinking there is still plenty of time. Do not silence the conviction that is rising within you. That sense you feel right now, that awareness, that urgency, that realization that something needs to change, that is not slucheno. That is your moment. And what you do with this moment will determine more than you realize. You were never meant to drift through life unaware. You were never meant to live in uncertainty while believing you are secure. You were meant to be ready, alert, focused, and aligned. Not someday, not later, not when it is convenient, but now. Because the difference between those who are ready and those who are not will not be how much they knew, but how they responded. It will not be what they planned, but what they acted on. It will not be what they assumed, but what they made certain. So take this seriously, not with fear, but with clarity. Not with hesitation, but with decision. Let this be the moment where everything changes, where you stop delaying, stop assuming, stop ignoring, and start responding. Because when that moment comes, there will be no second opportunity to prepare, no second chance to realign, no second moment to decide. There is only now. And now is enough to make sure you do not miss what matters most.